Hello, and welcome to Historical Fiction with Kwiatoslav. In this series, I like to draw attention to neglected works of 20th century writers of historical fiction. And usually I bring to you who I feel are fairly obscure writers. But today I'd like to discuss probably the most well-known author today, Robert E. Howard. And even if you don't know the name Robert E. Howard, you probably know his most famous creation, which is Conan the Cimmerian there. He also created characters such as Solomon Kane and Kull of Atlantis and so on there. And he basically invented the genre of sword and sorcery. And he was a writer in the 1930s who wrote for pulp magazines there. And he wrote a number of different in a number of different genres. I mean, he died at the age of 30, but he's got an extremely huge body of work. In that he wrote not only the sword and sorcery genre, but he also wrote boxing stories and horror stories and old westerns. But where I think he was at his absolute best are what are called his Crusader tales. These are kind of historical fiction tales that were written around the time of the Crusades, and they generally have the Crusades as a background, often taking place in the Near East, in Ultramar and so on there. And this is where I think he really achieved his greatest success, and that these stories are probably his most well-written and his most powerful stories. Although I enjoy the Conan stories, I definitely think the Crusader tales are much better. And luckily, there's a very nice collection of these tales, which was called Lord of Samarcand, which is the name of one of the stories as well, compiled by Rusty Burke there. And there's an introduction here, which I think is quite a nice introduction there, which is from a letter from Robert E. Howard, where he says, "There's no literary work to me half as zestful as rewriting history in the guise of fiction. I wish I was able to devote the rest of my life to that kind of work. I could write 100 years, and there would be stories clamoring to be written by the scores. Every page of history teems with dramas that should be put on paper," which I think is a really great way to write about historical fiction overall there. And unfortunately for us, Robert decided to move on from historical fiction because it was very time consuming in terms of research, and kind of created his own fictional world, the Hyborian Age there. And while I think that's a great creation, and I'm very happy that he did it, I think in many ways writing the historical fiction was much more of a challenge there. And obviously, I'm a fan of historical fiction, so I'm going to be a bit biased in favor of that. But I guess I would compare it to writing poetry, in that the Hyborian Age was something like writing free verse, in that he wasn't constrained by actual history there, whereas writing with historical fiction is writing in some type of verse, for example, iambic pentameter or something like that, where when you're able to pull it off, it's actually much more satisfying. And he's got fantastic tales here. The Red Blades of Black Cathay, which involves a Norman knight who journeys eastward in search of the land of Prester John, and ends up helping a kingdom under siege from Genghis Khan, and other ones such as the Lion of Tiberias, which involves the Zengi, the Islamic leader, and is a fantastic interwoven tale where two plot lines intersect. The Shadow of the Vulture, which is fantastic siege of Vienna in 1529, and also introduces us to two of the best characters, Gottfried von Kollenbach, the German knight, and his mistress Red Sonja, who you might have heard of. She was originally a Cossack from Ukraine who was involved in the defense of Vienna, and it's some of Howard's most kind of apocalyptic writing there, where I think he really achieved his ends. Overall, I think Robert E. Howard is probably one of my favorite authors of historical fiction, and I cannot recommend the Lord of Samarcand collection enough. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.